One time we were talking to one of our friends, and she was doing one of those role-playing things, and she was playing Catherine, and so she was telling us this dramatic story that we had never heard before, and we're like, wow, that would make such a good book.
Everybody knows about Martin Luther, but not very many people know the story of his wife, which is very dramatic and almost sounds like a fairy tale, but it's real, and it's just a really good story for people to know, you know.
She was a nun, and she ended up escaping and marrying Martin Luther. So girls in convents actually were almost taught to do nothing because she had been in there since she was like 6. She really didn't know how to do much of anything. She basically came into the real world. She had to catch up and learn how to do all this stuff as like a 24-year-old. One of the things was he was actually given a former monastery, so it was this huge place with all these rooms and stuff. So he ended up having this just like hub for hospitality, and thinkers that would come and they would spend time at his house, and she ran everything. And before that it was all dirty and run down, and then she married him and had to come in and, you know, spiff things up because he didn't have time to deal with it. It's just him and I believe one other guy that were living there. Well, Catherine knew how to put on silk and velvet and host nobility, or to get her hands dirty and feed pigs and scrub floors, and all on a shoestring budget.
Yep. She was a reformer that was behind the man.
Catherine is a very good example of what's described of the lady in Proverbs 31. She didn't just sit on a little cushion and stitch while Martin Luther read, or ride out on a horse with a sword and lop off the heads of the bad guys. She worked hard. She actually had a farm that she was running, and she was actually getting out there doing this stuff. She was very capable, and she just had all these details that she pulled together and managed.
Catherine Luther wasn't daunted by things. As a matter of fact, she cheered Martin Luther up many a time, or multiple times, when he was down and being attacked. And also, not only that, but they had a lot of children as well, and then raising the children. They also had some adopted children.
Because she ran the practical side of things, he had the time to translate the Bible into German, and to write and write and write and write, and to preach. He was able to do all those things because of her, and he wouldn't have been able to if she hadn't been there to help him.
She had a lot of responsibilities and easily could have gotten discouraged at all the things she had to do, and she got up very early. That's part of why the subtitle of the book is called The Morning Star of Wittenberg. That was a fond phrase that Martin Luther gave to her because she got up before dawn to start her day.
Something that's striking about Catherine and Martin Luther is they were having to look at all these things that were accepted as just the way things were done and were good, that were really bad in their culture, and go back to the Bible and say, what does the Bible say about this? That's something that is encouraging and inspiring in all times and in our culture today. And we had always talked about stories, like we were fascinated by stories, and as mid and late teenagers we were always throwing all these story ideas around and saying how we're going to make all these blockbuster movies with all this dramatic things happening, and we would just sit around and brainstorm. And being able to do something like a book as 4 sisters together and pull together all of our different strengths, it was a really good experience. Emily had been drawing for years, ever since she was a teenager. Just would sit in her room and draw for hours, and then, you know, you get older and you think, how am I going to use that? And then she was able to illustrate the book. And then Jenna also had done a lot of storyboarding and lighting and different movie making studying, and it came right in. You just took that and applied it to the book, so that was really fun. And then I had studied story and screenwriting, and Elizabeth had always loved maps and illumination.
And then it was Jenna's idea to actually put it into a children's book. It was her brainchild. Jenna and I wrote the book together. It was very much a combined team effort, and it was pretty much the research process. We completely did it together. So we read all this huge stack of books. I compiled a timeline of all the way too many details. We had a basic story structure that we were following. We knew we had this many pages to fit it in. We knew at this plot point, we needed this to happen. And then we just kind of laid out the timeline pieces in that story structure, and then we just started writing. So I was keeping us on track with the timeline, and then she made it sound good.
The thing I started with while Jen and Shannon were writing was we were trying to figure out what exactly Katharine's face should look like. So we have a painting of her, and the paintings in those eras were not very realistic. It kind of made her look strange. So the only thing that we could tell was she had a certain eye shape. I looked at a bunch of different pictures of women's face shapes and eye shapes, and I kind of combined some different looks and tried to put it together to make it look like what she would probably look like in real life.
Yeah, so she did the people, and then I did most of the, stuff or anything else that was in the picture. It's actually started out with a pencil drawing, and then watercolor, and then scanned it in and went over everything digital. I mean, when y'all talk about designing characters, we have, especially Emily, researched the history of fashion for years, again, since we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And really had a lot of fun with it and stuff. And so really did the research.
For the clothes and how people would fix their hair and what colors they wore. Almost like a fairy tale, but it's accurate because, a lot of times in fairy tales they'll have funny hats and stuff. The gatekeeper at the beginning, he was really fun because we imagined him this crotchety old guy that kept everybody out of the convent, and then
his name was Talheim.
We also put a dog in for him, a really grumpy dog.
And our original idea was that we wanted him to have a bulldog, but when we started researching bulldogs, we actually found out that they weren't, bulldogs didn't even exist until later, maybe the 17 or 1800s, and they were very British. So we actually found a dog, Bull-Advisor, that actually is extinct now, that at the time was used for hunting boars and bear. We did try to, any of the buildings or houses or towns or anything that you see, we tried to make them look like the places, or at least look like something that was accurate to the era. Katharine and Martin's house that had been a monastery before is still there, so you can see what that looks like on the outside at least.
Yeah.
But we needed to know, we needed to have an idea, because of all these illustrations, of from a lot of angles, what the convent probably looked like. The convent where Katharine lived there's nothing left except a few walls, and so we researched how convents were laid out, and we were able to find things about other convents, but a lot of them were very similar in how they laid things out, which was the inner cloister where the nuns lived, and that had a locked door, and there were limited people that were allowed. No men were allowed in that inner cloister. But then there was outer wall, and there were all kinds of things in the convent.
I researched geography for each place. Also, I researched trying to find what style of map that I wanted. There's old maps, there's new maps, there's a mix of both. There's a lot of fantasy maps. And so what I ended up doing was mixing satellite map, which is realistic. It's a real photo of the Earth, with an old 15 to 1600s old map, which is the tan manuscript old paper look with it. So what I ended up doing was mixing 15 to 1600s and medieval in the font, and the first letter is talking about something negative and sad, and so I used kind of bad guy colors like blue and red, and then when the last eliminated letter was something happy had happened, so green is a very happy color, and it looks like grass and blue sky, so I used blue and green for the telling about how the Reformation had spread and God's work had been accomplished in and through Martin Luther and Katharine von Bora.
Jenna is the one who thought through everything on the design as to layout and the shape, and from experience of reading books to children, to our nieces and nephew, it's sometimes books that are a certain shape are actually awkward for reading to children, like something that's kind of short and wide. Actually, that shape seems to get torn up easier and stick off the bookshelf too much.
Yes.
It doesn't sit on the bookshelf real well. Also, when the pages in a children's book have a sheen to them, then if you're reading to more than one child, somebody can't see the pictures because there's a glare.
At the time, we had 5 nieces and a nephew, so we were writing it for them, and we're just praising the Lord now.
My husband and I have baby Arabella, and Emily and her husband Daniel have a baby Daniel, and one on the way. So now we get to read this to our babies. So.
And then this one, they just got done eating ears and out.
Oh, a dog. There's the dog again. A dog,
And a
dog.
horse. Return the page.
Yes, you piggies. Oh, yeah. There's the dog in that picture, too. Yeah.
And a frog.
Ribbit.
And the
Baby's
baby.
like almost cut off.
Arabella, can you see baby? Baby. Oh, yeah, you saw that baby. She likes baby.
Is she hogging the book?
Oh.